There is a game that will make you feel genuinely stupid for the first 3 hours and then make you feel like the most dangerous thing alive for the next 15. That gap between confusion and mastery is not a design flaw, it is the entire point. Doom Eternal released in March 2020 and landed right at the start of a global pandemic, which means millions of people were locked at home with nothing but time and a game that demanded every single second of their attention. id Software had already rebooted the franchise brilliantly with Doom 2016, but Eternal was a different kind of statement. It was not just a sequel, it was a challenge, a direct confrontation between the player and the game that said, learn how to do this properly or get destroyed. 6 years later, that challenge has not softened one bit, and somehow that is exactly why this game is still worth talking about.
The story in Doom Eternal is significantly more expanded than Doom 2016, which is either a good thing or an annoying thing depending entirely on who you ask. The Doom Slayer is fighting a demonic invasion across Earth, traveling between dimensions, visiting ancient civilizations, and uncovering the full mythology behind the Sentinels, the Makers, and the origins of the Slayer himself. There are codex entries scattered throughout every level that go extremely deep into the lore. Khan Makers serves as the primary antagonist, and Samuel Hayden returns in a complicated role that shifts significantly by the end. The story tries to be grand and mythological, and it mostly succeeds in building a universe that feels larger than any single game. But here's the thing about the story in Doom Eternal. The people who came purely for the power fantasy of Doom 2016 found all this lore annoying and intrusive. The people who actually engaged with the codex entries and paid attention to the cutscenes found a surprisingly rich science fantasy narrative underneath all the demon guts. Both reactions are valid. The game does not force the story on you in the middle of combat, but it does interrupt the momentum with lengthy cutscenes more than its predecessor did. That is a genuine criticism worth acknowledging.
The Doom Slayer himself remains one of the most compelling silent protagonists in modern gaming. He does not speak, he does not explain himself, but the way he carries himself in cutscenes, the way other characters react to him with a mixture of fear and reverence, communicates everything about who he is more effectively than dialogue ever could. There is a specific scene early in the game where the Doom Slayer is being briefed by a commanding officer, and his reaction to the entire situation tells you precisely what kind of character he is. No words needed. Now, a combat. This is where Doom Eternal separates itself from everything else in the first-person shooter space, and this is where the real conversation begins. The combat in this game is not about finding cover and waiting for the right moment to shoot. It is a resource management system disguised as chaos. Every demon type in the game drops a specific resource when killed in a specific way. Killing with the chainsaw refills your ammo. Glory kills on staggered enemies drop health. The Flame Belt tool burns demons and makes them drop armor. You are constantly managing 3 separate resource bars simultaneously while also managing weapon cooldowns, positioning, enemy priorities, and platforming movement.
The Marauder enemy type is the clearest example of what this game demands from you. He appears mid-game and he punishes every bad habit you have developed up to that point. He blocks most attacks, counters aggression, and requires very specific timing to damage effectively. When Eternal launched, a large portion of the player base hated the Marauder and called him unfair. 6 years later, the community largely agrees that he is one of the finest enemy designs in shooter history because he forced players to actually apply the combat rules the game had been teaching since the first level. The initial frustration was real, but so was the eventual understanding. The weapon roster is excellent, and each weapon fills a specific role in the combat ecosystem. The ballista handles heavy armored enemies efficiently. The plasma rifle with the microwave beam traps and pops weaker enemies. The ice bomb freezes clusters for crowd control. The crucible sword one-shots major demons. None of these are cosmetically different versions of the same tool. Each one has a specific purpose, and recognizing which weapon the current situation demands is a skill that develops over the entire length of the campaign. The mod system, where each weapon can equip one of 2 alternate fire modes, adds another layer of decision-making without ever becoming confusing.
Movement in Doom Eternal is as important as shooting. The dash mechanic, the meat hook on the super shotgun that launches you towards enemies, the monkey bars, the wall climbing surfaces, and the launch pad spread across every arena combine to make the Doom Slayer one of the most mobile protagonists in any shooter ever made. Combat arenas are essentially 3-dimensional puzzle boxes, and learning to use the vertical space as efficiently as the horizontal space is a turning point in how the game feels.
Once that clicks, combat transforms from overwhelming to exhilarating. The upgrade systems include Praetor suit points for passive upgrades, Sentinel crystals for health, ammo, and armor capacity increases, runes for combat modifiers, and weapon points for unlocking and upgrading mods. None of these systems are particularly deep individually, but together they give you meaningful choices throughout the campaign about what kind of Slayer you want to build. The Empyrean keys unlock Sentinel armor bonuses and require finding Slayer gates, which are optional challenge rooms that pit you against brutal enemy encounters for the best rewards in the game. These optional encounters are genuinely some of the most demanding content in the entire campaign, and completing all of them is a serious test of mastery.
The level design deserves significant credit. Each environment is visually distinct and purposely constructed. The cultist base feels completely different from Urdak, which feels completely different from the Super Gore Nest. The environments tell stories through their architecture about what happened in those places before the Slayer arrived. There are also quieter exploration sections between combat arenas where you look for secrets, extra lives, collectible figures, and hidden challenges. These pacing breaks are genuinely welcome, and the secrets are hidden with enough cleverness that finding them feels earned rather than accidental. Mick Gordon's soundtrack for Doom 2016 was legendary. The situation with Doom Eternal's soundtrack is complicated and worth understanding. Gordon composed the music for Eternal as well, but a dispute between him and id Software over the final mastering of the soundtrack became public and caused significant damage to that professional relationship. The in-game music, regardless of the behind-the-scenes conflict, is ferocious and precisely calibrated to the intensity of what is happening on screen. The BFG Division style of industrial metal paired with demonic choir elements creates an audio experience that physically elevates your heart rate during combat. However, the official soundtrack release was handled separately, and that controversy remains a dark chapter in the game's legacy.
Visually, Doom Eternal still performs remarkably well in 2026. The art direction leans heavily into the grotesque and the grandiose simultaneously, and it pulls both off. Demon designs are varied and detailed. Environments shift between hellscapes, ancient ruins, and futuristic facilities with genuine visual personality in each. The game runs at high frame rate smoothly on modern hardware, and the technical performance has never been a serious issue. At launch, there were some shader compilation stutters on PC, but those were patched relatively quickly, and the game today runs cleanly. The replay value is high for a specific type of player. The campaign takes around 15 to 20 hours on a first run, depending on difficulty and how much exploration you do. The master levels, which are remixed versions of existing levels with harder enemy placements and modified rules, provide significant additional challenge content. The Horde mode, added later, gives structured wave-based combat for players who want pure combat practice without the campaign structure. The difficulty scaling from Hurt Me Plenty all the way up to Ultra Nightmare, where a single death ends the entire run permanently, means the ceiling of challenge in this game is essentially limitless. The weaknesses of Doom Eternal are real. The story interruptions genuinely hurt the momentum in specific chapters. The platforming sections, while intentionally designed as breathing room, occasionally feel slightly out of place in a game this relentlessly focused on combat. And the battle mode multiplayer, where one player controls the Slayer against two players controlling demons, was an interesting idea that never found a large enough audience to feel truly alive and has essentially become a footnote.
But when you step back and look at what Doom Eternal actually achieved, the picture is clear. It took one of the most beloved shooter reboots of the previous decade and raised the mechanical complexity without sacrificing the fundamental satisfaction of the original formula. It proved that first-person shooters could demand real strategic thinking without abandoning raw aggression. It set a standard for combat design that most shooters released since have quietly been reaching toward without fully arriving. Doom Eternal gets a 4.6 out of 5. The story pacing issues, the divisive soundtrack situation, and the underdeveloped multiplayer prevent a perfect score, but they do not undermine what is genuinely one of the finest pure gameplay experiences in shooter history. If you want a game that respects your intelligence enough to demand that you get better at it, this is one of the best options the genre has ever produced. If this kind of honest, detailed look at gaming history is what you are here for, drop a like because it genuinely helps. Subscribe so you catch the next review the moment it lands. Share this with someone who thinks modern shooters have nothing interesting left to offer. And tell me in the comments, what difficulty did you first finish Doom Eternal on? And how many times did the Marauder make you want to uninstall the game? Be honest.